Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper with Bobby and Bridge. Disagreements, conflicts, most of us hate them. How do we have professional conversations when we're not on the same page? Do you just want to shout, "Pigeon!" at them? Today we're talking about how to use curiosity to better understand other points of view and to dig down to find our commonality as humans. Because most of the time, our differences are far fewer than our similarities. Come and join us for Being a Navigator. Hi, Bobby.
Hello, how art thou?
I'm good. We're going to be talking about navigating different opinions or navigating the wild territory of disagreement, I guess. I have come at this really from just what I'm looking at the moment, which I'm doing a course which has been super interesting, actually, based on nonviolent communication, which comes from a guy called Rosenberg, who wrote about it in the 70s. And I'm sort of working with this amazing woman called Mickey Cashton, who collaborates with the Nonviolent Global Liberation Community in America. And she's running these facilitation training and coaching facilitators in nonviolent communication to create a community. And yeah, I'm finding it really interesting, but actually quite challenging, because I come from a background of having arguments to win when I was a lawyer.
Having a row.
Well, no, as a lawyer, all of our discussions, inverted commas, it's about winning and losing. It's all very binary. It's all very black and white. And I do find it very challenging.
What's your greatest struggles with it? From where you've come from and where you're going to?
I guess there is a lot of ego in discussion for me still, I think. And I do still view it as I'm right, the other person's an idiot. And, I still do sort of struggle with the feelings that I get in my body that I'm sort of spend more time being aware of now when someone pushes back vehemently or disagrees strongly on something that I hold very dear. And I've always struggled with that. Also, I sort of run forward. My brain is always thinking of what to say next and how to organize the argument rather than listening. And obviously listening is fundamental to so many things, but proper listening to understand rather than to respond, it is not my default position. So it's sort of, in Rosenberg's terms, moving from the jackal, which is judgment, criticism, aggression, to being a giraffe, which is heart, compassion, and benevolence.
I'd forgotten he said it like that. Yes. It puts me in mind of as well, because, I've read a little of the nonviolent communication Rosenberg piece as well. And in my coaching world, we often talk about the structure of interpretation, which sounds very grandiose, and maybe as I explain it, you can come up with a easier way of describing it. But the way I visualize it is two circles. And if you think about your lawyer type of interaction, there's your world and then there's the other lawyer's world. And I suppose I know that you're a barrister, so I'm mixing metaphors here, but there's one on prosecution and one on defense, right?
In criminal law, yeah.
In criminal law, for example. So I use that as the example. So there's two very different worlds going on, two very different stories. There's my structure of interpretation over here and the other person's over here. So to bring that together with what you're saying about where both are listening to understand rather than to respond, you want to move into the middle of those two concentric circles, like the intersection of it, so that you have an appreciation of what the other world is saying. And I guess if we look at the two circles were never going to meet in a lawyery type world because you both needed to be right. Whereas what you're learning in the work that you're now in is how to get into that intersection.
Yeah. And I did some mediation training and, lots of it based on or similar principles to nonviolent communication in terms of looking at other people's perspectives, trying to find the needs, because that's one of the sort of principles in Rosenberg's approach, is to understand. You're supposed to observe what's going on, then derive what feelings people have, but what then is the need that comes from that feeling, and understand needs much better, because ultimately we're recognizing that everyone is human. As humans, we all have very similar needs, and so there may be this different need in terms of the disagreement, but there's all kinds of other needs that overlap or that are the same, because we're all human and because humans have very similar needs. And then it's sort of looking at how you can best find a solution that suits the needs, because often what people are arguing about is not necessarily what the problem is. So that's why the whole idea of the listening to understand is so important.
Yeah. I'm interested in what you're saying about the feelings, because one of the things that I was reading about this business about actually being participative and navigating different points of view. This listening piece, we'll keep coming back to it again and again in this episode. I'm absolutely sure of it. But there's the listening, but there's also some of the things to say in order to show or to model that you are listening to understand. So there's all the things that we can get into about how you make yourself a better listener, but the language, and you must be coming up with this, I would imagine, in the course that you're doing now, but it's things like, there's a level of acceptance in the first place that is a fact of life that not everybody thinks the same way. How utterly tedious that would be if that was the case. So there is this differing points of view, which is fact. But the thing that I read said something about when you're in conversations like this is making I statements. So less about I think and more about I feel or I sense. So it's not categorically this is the case, you're wrong, but how the other person's viewpoint makes you feel.
Yeah.
Has there been any of that with what you've been practicing or in your learning?
So at the moment I'm in the process, I'm really sort of on the bystand and watching and listening, the coaching of an example. Really fascinating. But yeah, this issue of I feel annoyed because you're always late might be one. But then it's sort of digging down, and this is again where curiosity comes into, and we've talked about curiosity a lot, is to, so what's the need that you have that's causing that feeling? And so you then sort of have to dig around a little bit, and it may come from a need to feel respected. If you're the boss and the person's always late, I'm annoyed about that. Why are you annoyed? Because I need to be respected as the boss, and it's disrespectful to be late, or I feel it's disrespectful, or it doesn't satisfy my need to feel respected. I've been really interested in it. I still find it super challenging because it's very slow.
Yeah.
Lots of pauses.
Yes.
And so for me, it feels very slow and drawn out. And for my sort of slightly rapid brain and my I can feel myself I really have to change my frequency, which doesn't come naturally to me. So I find it very challenging, even just to listen to, because it is being done very, very slowly, and there's interventions by the coach to talk to the facilitator, and then also to ask each of the people who are being facilitated in the mediation, how they're feeling, what's their motivation for what they said. And it's really, every single word and every single choice is analysed, and I find it extraordinary. It's fascinating, but I find it quite difficult. Just as I've talked about this Erasmus course that I went on, again, on facilitation, and one of the things that we all had to do after every bit of training was then go into a group and do reflection. And one of the things that we were asked to do on one day was to, if we were asked questions or we were going to ask questions, was to pause and take a breath before we spoke, which was, again, slowed the whole conversation down. And I'd noticed at the beginning, before we sort of started doing the practice, that the facilitators always did it. They'd be asked a question and they'd take this deep breath, and then they would pause, and then they would maybe say thoughtfully what they're. And I was thinking, God, this check-in's going to be taking all day. But actually, once you do start to change the vibration and the frequency, it's easier to listen for a start. And the taking of the breath really does force you forces me to move out of my natural, slightly higher, like anxiety vibration that is my general approach to life.
I absolutely hear. It puts me so much in mind of when I first started doing my coaching development, which of course I'm now into double figures. I find that completely extraordinary every time I say it. But yeah, 11 years on from when I first started down this route. And I remember so well, the way that you're describing it is so much my own experience as well, where first module, all in a room together, 17 of us, something like that, I think. And they were going around the room doing a check-in, and it was 5 minutes each. But I remember, I think it was 5 minutes each. Let me just make that up. Say it was 5 minutes each. But I remember as people were talking, I was writing down how long that would take. 17 times 5. A little gap in the middle for people getting hold of the stopwatch, because I thought, well, this is good. We've got a stopwatch. No one's allowed to go over time. It was all the very routine bang, bang, bang that I really loved. I didn't take account that there was sort of long breaths and thanking. I make it sound like I've been flippant about it. I'm not, but I'm just giving an example of how I was feeling at the time, because the person would finish speaking and then from the coaches that there would be appreciation of what they'd said. Yeah. And I was like, what the fuck? This is like creeping death. But of course, now I know more about it. What's actually happening when you're changing that pace, changing that tempo, is that these glorious people were just defusing our nervous system a bit to allow for something else to happen. And like you, that whole year that I was in the learning and development of this piece, I struggled with that all the time. I'd have moments in the modules where I felt like I could really get onto that. But what I found was when I let my nervous system relax, I'd just start crying.
Yeah.
I was an emotional wreck.
Yeah.
Because I'd been so taught and so, come on, let's get on with this, active, gung-ho, tra-la-la. And even when it came round to our sort of like a graduation and doing that again, we spent 2 whole days watching each other coach and watching each other having our development conversations. And I'm pretty sure, I've never asked Nina, who we've had on before, but I am pretty sure that they did this deliberately. But of the 17 people, if that was the right number, I was the last person. I had to sit and wait for 2 days. Yeah. And I think that they had done that deliberately just to see what it would do to my body and what it would do to me, that waiting game. And I remember when the first person stood up, and I think this happens when we're navigating points of view as well, especially if we're in ego mode. I started writing notes on what she was doing and comparing that to what I needed to make sure I did when it came to my turn. And about 5-10 minutes into that first conversation, something went off in my head to say, what the friggin' hell are you doing? Have you learned nothing in this last 12 months? All you are expected to do for the next 2 days is to sit and listen. And it was an absolute watershed because I managed it. And I know I went in as an entirely different person at the end of those 2 days that I feasibly could have done if I hadn't got not a grip of myself, if I hadn't softened myself. That was the whole thing. I'd spent my whole life getting a grip of myself. Come on, chop, chop.
Yeah.
And I think it sounds like that's what you're in now. But until you're onto that, getting into navigating other people's points of view is trickier.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you keep reverting and the theory of, read all the stuff, listened to people, but actually the doing of it is really, really hard. And the other thing I noticed, and I think that you sort of just referred to a little bit, was I noticed in the coaching with Mickey, so Mickey's coaching some of the facilitators, is that, she'll make a point and then she'll sort of say, do you understand that? Does that land with you? I kind of know from my personal experience that my normal reaction to that would be, yep, got it. And just to get out of the discomfort of being sort of coached and told, yeah, that worked, that didn't work. I'm just listening to her at the moment, or everybody who's taking part at the moment. And one of the things she said was that when she's coaching, she also stops people when they're doing things right, because she said it just isn't helpful to just always, if you're always being stopped because something's wrong, but she stops people when they're doing things right because she wants to highlight it for everyone. So she then digs down into, so people go, yeah, I understand. And then she's like, so explain to me what your understanding is. Explain to me what it is that you might do differently. And I can feel my anxiety on behalf of the person who's being coached going, oh God, I would just be like, fuck off and leave me alone. I said, I understand. I've done it. I did what you wanted me to do. Leave me alone now. I'm so uncomfortable. And one of the people who's being coached, who's the facilitator, is a very experienced nonviolent communication facilitator. And Mickey's already said that, don't know why you're here. But then she sort of dug down into one piece, and the woman kind of fell apart in terms of the
deconstruction.
Yeah, and everything, as you say, is all about thanking. It's saying there's always a thank you for that honesty, thank you for that vulnerability. This is really, this is so important. And people saying thank you for pointing that out to me. This is really valuable. And so it's a real lesson in terms of acknowledging that what otherwise might be viewed as an uncomfortable experience, if you change the viewpoint, is an opportunity to get better, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to connect, even if it's just connecting, even if you're disagreeing. And I can see the power and the beauty in that, and the beauty in the calmness. In a way, it's kind of, because I don't get it, I see it and go, wow, that's amazing. Wish I could do that. And yeah, sorry.
Go on, sorry. No, I one of the things about active listening is not interrupting, and that's exactly what I've just done. But I almost want to stop you in mid-flow to say, please go easy on yourself. Because if I think about my lifestyle, my interactions with people, so our family, when other people join our family or, come and go, I think we're quite harsh to each other because it's full on banter. We will beautifully and lovingly rip into somebody, but we tease and we banter. And in all of that, that is not respecting people. That's not dissing their points of view, but we do take the mickey in our love of each other. So to go off and do my coaching thing, and then of course, like you, I've had the military experience. I've had that, come on, push for everything, that assertive, let's go get it sort of like style. To then blend that in with coaching, I don't sit around wafting around in a caftan singing Kumbaya all day, because there's some way of actually being able to bring all of this stuff that you're learning, and it's been the same for me, into who you really are. And so I guess now when I actually coach in real, rather than the training elements to it, I am still me. Somebody said, I ought to call my coaching punch in the face coaching, because I don't let people off the hook. I can be quite sort of like on the money. Anyone listening to this who's had any form of coaching with me might tell you that. But never is it done without respect or care. But it's somehow being me to really bring them out into the light. And I think that the active listening allows to do that, because the other thing that you'll be hearing in the sort of person that you are is what's been left out, because you're on to what's been left out of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I do understand that I'm seeing people who behave very differently to me. And, in a way, that community is very much softer than my experience. And there are times where I have to sort of think about, is this realistic? Because I think one of the things that was said was, you have to genuinely be interested, and you have to genuinely thank people. Don't say thank you if you don't really mean it. And
you don't mean it, no.
They're going, well, I wouldn't mean it. So how do you navigate that? I know these people have been working in social justice spaces and have been doing this an awfully long time. And I think the best thing, one of the things that resonated me most recently was doing all the check-ins and hearing what people were saying. And there were 2 points that came out of that. One was, I was really fascinated by the breadth of language that was used to describe how people were feeling. I just was looking up just today was a dictionary of emotions, because often we just say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling this. And actually, I was really struck by how nuanced people's on this course, their descriptions of how they were feeling and how much more descriptive they were in terms of where they were, sort of saying, I'm needing tenderness at the moment was a really like a beautiful thing to say. And actually, I can really resonate with that. And I think that if someone says, look, I'm struggling at the moment, I've had a really hard time, lots of things are happening to me, I need some tenderness, that might be in a space where normally you would banter, but I haven't got the resources for banter today. I haven't got the resources to have the piss taken out of me today. I need real, genuine tenderness. And there was a discussion about, you have to treat people differently according to their needs and your own capacity. So you have to sort of balance both of those, because on one day you might have lots of capacity and on another day you might not. And so that's why often being able to have disagreements works better when they're with people that you know and trust, because you've kind of built the container. You understand there is a level of trust there, and there's a level of caring and courage in the container that's been built. Whereas having a disagreement or a difference of opinion with someone who you don't trust to hold you with respect and to disagree with you in a respectful way, understanding maybe how you are, coming to that discussion during that day, is much harder.
I hear you. I agree with you. And I think that there are other ways into the navigating of points of view, especially if you don't think that you are in the container. Well, there's two things I'm going to say. There's the place that you trust and feel safe in. What can sometimes happen in there, which is a challenge, is that the people who are in that container are so used to you showing up in a particular way. If you turn around and say, today I need tenderness, because they're used to bantering and taking the piss, they go, what the hell are you talking about? And suddenly it doesn't feel, it'll still feel safe, but, are you being truly heard?
Yeah.
So it can work that way, as well as what do we practice in places where we don't think that we're going to get that same level of respect? And I guess I'm sitting here listening and curious about what happens in organisations, because I'm not sure I'd go into any of the corporate environments that I worked in and say to them, I could really do with a bit of tenderness today. But what might happen if I'm feeling raw is that I would spend whatever the conversation was about, which should be an exploration of differing points of view, asking questions, which makes or influences others to create a different container. You make them do the work.
Yeah.
So when you've got somebody who's been absolutely emphatic about something, rather than leading with I disagree, here's my point of view, this is how it makes me feel, blah, 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 which might entrench them further. Questions about, can we just explore that? How have you come to that point of view? Tell me more.
Yeah.
That's you modelling the respect that you want to have in return. And the more that they open up, the more that you are likely to find the avenue to say, can I just come in on that? Because whilst I can see that perspective, I'm still not sure on this one. Can we get into this bit? Because you begin to nuance.
Yeah.
And they've done the work for you. They're the ones that then create the opening by you asking the questions. And I think that for you and I, whilst we're exploring how it feels to be thanking people or being appreciative or sitting and taking the breath or being the calm influence or whatever, one of the things that shapes you already, Bridge, is questions. You're used to that from Barristerville. So that's something that you can play with more in facilitation and coaching.
Yeah.
Because you've already got that. So it's almost like building on the strength while the other things are growing.
Yeah. And I think that, you're absolutely right in that some of this softer, more lengthy sort of ways of engaging maybe would not land so well in corporate experiences. But I do think there are some things that you can take away from it. One of them is that idea of the same objective, that ultimately, especially in a work environment, often there's a disagreement about a way forward or a solution or how to solve a problem or where the next step is. And so always remembering that actually, we're both trying to do the best for the company. We're both trying to do the best for this team. This idea that we're all human and we do share, regardless if we diverge on some things, actually the majority of things we still have in common. Humans want, they want appreciation, they want connection, they want, or most humans do, they want respect, they want to be able to earn enough to be able to do the things that they need in their lives. They want to have some leisure time. We all have so much more in common than we don't.
I love that. And it's something that I'd written down here, is that the more that you stay in the conversation, however you do that, be that with questions, be that with listening, whatever it might be, that what you're seeking is sameness, not difference.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing that I'd read somewhere was from me to we, which is another way of saying it, because, that funny saying about, I think we're in violent agreement here. I think that people are often after the same thing. They've just got very different ways of coming about it. But the more that you remain curious and in that exploratory bit, and those questions, tell me more about this, tell me more about that, whatever it might be, you begin to land on, as I say, the sameness, not difference.
Yeah. Have you seen there's a little cartoon where there's sort of 5 people and they're all at different places on an elephant and they're all concluding what this thing is because none of them can see the whole thing. And so, there's one on a leg going, this is a tree trunk. And there's one by the trunk and going, oh, this is a snake. And if you ask everyone, they'll be adamant, no, this is a tree. No, this is a snake. No, this is this. And people can get very, very bogged down in being right. And I do think that, particularly if you're trying to come at solutions, I think there is an element of everybody needing to let go a little bit. And as you say, the questions are a way of moving away from this is my opinion, and just keeping banging the two opinions together constantly. Yeah. And nobody gets anywhere because just there's two opinions just banging against each other. So yeah, I think that there's a real need for, in a way, a little bit of softness in that.
I think that's back to that fixed mindset versus growth mindset again.
Yeah. And I think that often there is a tendency for many humans to think in a binary way. It's either this or it's that, without sort of acknowledging the nuances. And I think that there's also an issue of admitting that you are wrong, or even if you don't want to admit that you're wrong, admitting that you have been persuaded or that you've moved away from your original stance, that that you have seen, okay, I get that bit isn't going to work after we've had the questions discussion. Yeah, okay, I get where you are. And you can see that there are some humans who really struggle with that. Myself, I love that. Often myself being like that.
Yeah. I remember again in my coaching development, and I've heard it since, and I use it myself, is that most things are this and that, which takes account of the sameness rather than difference thought process. But I also know where I have, for whatever reason, been in meetings with my team, whatever that team might be. I mean, absolutely dogged about, no, we're doing it like this. And I remember in the early days just watching people shut down because I was so dogmatic about how something needed to be done. Whereas I really hope, that those who've worked with me latterly, I go, right, I've got this idea, but now we need to flesh it out. Or I think ladies that I've spoken about before, Sarah Nicole, would always be like, oh God, she's been on holiday. She's come back with a shit ton of light bulb moments. Now we've got to smash every light bulb that we can get our hands on because she'll have had too much time to think. So I usually had to be dragged back in for too many ideas. And I know that as well. But it was done jokingly and with a level of love. They brought me back down to earth. And I've had other teams like that. But equally, sitting down with the whole gang, the much wider team, and saying, right, these are the things that we've got to deliver. How are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Now, I may well have really very strong ideas about how I want things done. And I probably still do. But what I think I've learned is that if it still gets us to the end game, but it's the way that they are comfortable doing it and it gets us there, what is the issue?
Yeah.
So that's the nuance that you talk about.
Yeah.
It might take a bit longer. Can we afford for it to take a bit longer? Yes, we can. So in which case, these people have got this. They've taken responsibility for it. Let them get on with it.
Yeah.
But what I've found in all of that, all of these things that we're talking about, is that, and I think that you're probably finding the same for yourself as well, you learn so much more about yourself. So your own point of view on self and others expands as a result of trying things differently.
Yeah, and I share similar experiences to you when I was earlier in my career, being very, very firm on this is the way to go, and actually having to learn to let go, that it doesn't matter that my choice won, as long as it's still a choice that is going to, as you say, is going to achieve the objective. And if it's something, as you say, particularly if you're into coaching or trying to develop teams, if they've come up with something themselves and it can still work, yeah, you have to let go of that ego of but my idea was brilliant and was going to be the best. But just go, okay, yeah, this is great. This is going to work. Hooray, let's get on with it, rather than sticking your heels in and going, no, but this will be, 1% better. And also it's my idea, so it's obviously better. I wanted to go back a little bit, just because you were going to go through some attributes of listening or how to speak. And I think you'd mentioned I statements. And obviously there's other things around that use of the I statements, which is not blaming, not criticizing, not personalizing things. And we talked about respect and common ground. Were there any other elements that you thought that we should, or that you'd looked at that you thought would be useful for people listening?
Well, there's a couple of things from this business of conscious listening. So one of the things, and I think that this comes to mind with some of the stuff that you've been saying about how you've been feeling while you've been in those sessions. And I may well have talked about this before with my somatic background. I'm bound to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Whole body listening. So I was thinking about if this was the place to talk about this in terms of conscious listening. There's so many of the things that we've popped into other episodes, but they come back round again. So let's go non-verbal first if we're talking about whole body listening. So eye contact. When I go back to that first session where that check-in that seemed to go on all day, the next thing that we did was we sat in front of another person and did not say a word, which what seemed like for hours, and we just had to stare into their eyes.
Yikes.
It is probably one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever done in my life. But again, if I think back on it now, and I've gone back as a mentor on the course and what have you, and I do that again and I watch people wriggling in their seats and I feel for them.
I'm wriggling just thinking about it, Bobby. It's making me so uncomfortable.
I'm going to make you do it next time I see you before wine, even for just a matter of moments. And of course, my somatic work does the same, where we do different exercises as well. But that level of connection through eye contact and not saying anything. So there's the face, and now add in a smile.
Oh, crikey.
You are opening a window. It's the most vulnerable thing in the world.
Wasn't there some thing, I'm sure I read it, and I can't remember when it was, might have been the 90s, where there was a thing, how to fall in love with someone, and that was this looking at each other for 6 minutes. If you looked at each other for 6 minutes, I think you did ask questions, but you just weren't allowed to break eye contact, that then you would be in love. Well, maybe I just
I have to say, all joking aside, but for me, the level of connection that you had, and you just moved around the room, and I think we did it with of the group, probably 3 or 4 different people, and how it felt when somebody broke eye contact with you. It's like you've been left when you're doing it under that level of intensity. And if you think about what is normally happening in conversations now in the workplace, one, it's often virtual.
Yeah.
And you're never quite sure where your eyes are looking. Where's your camera? And is that so I stare intently at the person who is speaking from the other end. Probably puts them off a bit and thinks that I'm some kind of stalker. But that level of interaction. And I know more recently than perhaps in the last 10 years or so, but the number of people who now bring a laptop into a meeting and they are looking at that and they are not looking around the room. They're not looking at the person that's speaking. And so there is a level of connection and listening that's lost constantly. Mobile phones, people looking at those rather than who they're speaking to. So distraction is the thing for me as well. But that whole element of using your face, that's the first start of whole body listening. We've talked about being a heart speaker as well as a heart listener. So what happens there when you're much more open and settled? We've talked about ground and space. That will also help with listening as well. Being expansive rather than Barry Big Bollocks with your legs spread and your arms behind your head. That is not a listening pose.
Yeah.
That is an ego pose.
Yeah.
And I use it as an example, but equally, how well are you listening if you're all tight up with your shoulders hunched, shrinking? So the body comes into play with that, grounding so that you feel settled and rooted whilst you are listening to somebody else's point of view. And not in a dogged, I'm standing my ground way, but just so that you are dignified in how you're sat and listening to them and respecting what they're saying. And if everybody's doing that, the essence and the style of the conversation, I think, becomes different. And much of that I have learnt whilst I've been in my coaching realm. I've brought that into the workplace as much as I possibly can. And I have good days on that. And I have days when I'm not engaged because I'm busy writing notes or something's gone on. And I'm equally prone to be doing something on a computer. But I note to self, bolt of lightning flying through me, because I know that doesn't work. What I've taken away from a session or a lesson or a meeting when I have done it versus when I don't.
So you notice the difference tangibly.
I really do, in terms of my understanding how it's been with people. And I often find that if I know that I have been like that in a meeting, I will go and seek the people out because I almost want to rectify the situation because I haven't properly listened to them. Now, I might not go into them and say, do you know what? I wasn't listening to you in the meeting. But it may well be, how was the meeting for you? Did you get what you wanted? Did you get what you needed? Was there anything from our interaction that we still need to flesh out further, whatever it might be, rather than just leaving it? And again, that's the level of reflection afterwards about, I haven't done as well today. We're allowed to have off days, plenty of them as well, if I think of myself.
Yeah.
But we're back to commitments and intentions. My intentions is not to be like that. And I know that I readily give myself into that sort of active bodily listening when I'm coaching somebody. I need to take that into all interaction, including my family. They probably sometimes get the rougher end of the deal if I'm running around doing other stuff, when in actual fact, I should be just sitting down listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think that there's all of that can go on before you even open your mouth to be ready to receive. And then in terms of these statements around, I feel, I think, the other one I tend to use, which corroborates my listening, is paraphrasing. And again, I think that that's something that will come easily to you because you'll have had to listen to somebody else's viewpoint, argument or whatever, but you're paraphrasing it and changing it creatively into what you actually need. So the art of paraphrasing, I don't think, will be a new one to you.
Bobby, I do think that you need to take care with paraphrasing because there's, as you said, there's a paraphrasing to clarify understanding and there's a paraphrasing to persuade. I have seen and used paraphrasing in a sort of weaponized way. And I think that needs to be just, you're paraphrasing to clarify.
Yes, absolutely. So apologies. I was suggesting that you know how to do it. You might have used it for a different situation, but you've practiced it. But yes, absolutely. What I'm suggesting is paraphrasing for clarification. And so absolutely right. But it draws you again into that intersection of, can I just clarify? This is what I heard.
Yeah.
This is what I heard. The fact that when people come back and say, yeah, got it in one, God, I wish I put it like that, or things like that. One, it boosts you and they've really been seen and heard. So you don't have to do the strokey, thank you very much for that. I so appreciate you. You can do it in a way that feels more like you.
Yeah.
I know that that's the way I do it. And I know that what that comes across like is appreciation and respectful because you've really listened to what they've said and you've got it. You've nailed it. So that's a great one to practice, and especially for in the workplace. And then say, well, thank you. If I'm right with hearing it like that, here's what I think.
Yeah.
So nice way into it. And I think that's encouraging as well. I think that that's the main things that I'd sort of like got down on the list. I mean, I don't know how they all said. Oh, I know there was one more. You said about words to describe how you feel.
Yeah.
Two things there. One, I have lists of those.
Awesome.
One that I got from my coaching space, but two, if I hear a really lovely way of somebody saying something like that, I keep a note going, there'll be a point in time where that might feel natural for me to say, or I can practice it. I can practice that because it really touched me. How does it sound when I start using it? And then the other one, which is also about navigation, and I think I may well have done this. My brain is so addled that I think I gave this as a gift in one of our Christmas gifts, but Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, which navigates you through all of the different emotions and how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And again, getting a grip of how things bounce in you with how you're feeling. It's a great navigational tool as well. Anyway, I've said a lot. How does that all sound?
Really helpful. And I'm hoping also helpful to the listeners. I do think this idea of having a wide emotional vocabulary also is really helpful. I think that often we don't take the time to really think about how we're feeling. It's a sort of, I'm feeling a bit like the I'm fine. We come up with something as a default statement, but actually doing a little bit of reflection as to how am I feeling? How am I feeling? Why is this bothering me? Why is this making me feel uncomfortable? What is it about this discomfort? What's causing that discomfort? I think that taking the time to actually be able to think about it, because until you're not going to be able to express it to someone else. And I think that one of the other elements that I do think is important in terms of navigating disagreement or differing opinions is also knowing when to pull out of a discussion. Because there are some times where it's not moving forward, it is draining your emotional resources, and it's damaging to a relationship or whatever. And I do think that we also need to be able to recognize when a discussion is not constructive and how to remove yourself from it. I'm particularly thinking in terms of marginalized groups. And I've had discussions with friends of mine from the BIPOC community who will say, actually, it's called challenging by choice. And it's, if you are going to end up in a conversation where it's about racism or sexism, and you are the person who is suffering from that particular type of oppression, it's absolutely your choice to opt in or out. You don't have to be the representation of that oppressed group all the time, because it's exhausting. And so you can choose to opt out and leave it to someone who's got more resources to engage in that particular discussion, and just go, particularly if those sort of discussions can then become aggressive or potentially violent. So, navigation can also mean sailing away.
I completely agree. And, potentially the most powerful thing is to say, I don't feel resourced. I don't feel up for having this conversation. So I'm going to leave you to it. Because if those people are expansive enough to go, what just happened? You've already started to get them to think differently about a point of view. So that the sailing away sometimes makes space if you've got other people in the room who are willing to not just then fill it with, right now I'm going to just get even more dogged in my opinion about something. But what just happened? What was going on for them not to feel ready to have that conversation, or whatever it might be? I mean, and the fact is that they don't feel resourced by it, but it's what questions, what curiosity is left by that, I think, is helpful too on occasion.
Yeah, I just sometimes will say pigeon and walk off, because there's that phrase of, arguing with someone who has crazy ideas or so far away from your ideas is like playing chess with a pigeon, because they're going to shit on the board, kick over all the pieces and still strut off as if they won. And so, there are just some times where it's just not worth your effort to get involved in that, what is essentially an ego trip with someone.
Oh my God, you've just gone completely random-esque on me again. A pigeon playing chess, shitting on the board. Right, I'm just writing this down because I am loving using MS Designer at the moment, and I'm going to write that in and see what comes up.
Oh, awesome, yes.
Oh my God.
Can't wait to see it.
Oh, I love that. No, exactly.
Have you got a quote?
I have. I do want to suggest that I'm going to put into the references is somebody that I came across. Oh my God, I haven't written down his name. Julian? Oh my goodness, Julian, what was your surname? Julian Treasure. How could I have forgotten?
Oh, awesome
Julian
name.
Treasure. Awesome name. And he has written a book called How to Be Heard: Secrets for Powerful Speaking and Listening, which I'm going to stick in the references because he's got 5 TED Talks out as well, one of which is about practices for listening, which are awesome. So I'm just going to leave you with that. Ooh, let me go and have a look at that as well, because he's got some great stuff to say about practices to support all the things that we have been talking about, which will help you in navigating different points of view. And on that note, my quote for conclusion is from somebody called Whitney Wolfe Herd. I thought that was quite an extraordinary surname as well, with Herd being in the title. But she says, life is about perspective and how you look at something. Ultimately, you have to zoom out.
Lovely. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for that chat. It was really, really useful.
Thanks, Bridge.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. That was the last episode of season 2, and we're going to take a break for Easter, but so you don't miss us too much, we're going to leave you some Easter gifts over the next 4 weeks. Next week, we'll be packing a basket of little Easter eggs for you on the theme of your inner voice leaking out in School Your Face. See you then.